Imagine waking up on May 8th, 2026, and discovering that the political landscape of Britain has been completely redrawn overnight, not by a general election, but by local and devolved elections that nobody really pays attention to until suddenly everyone cares because they've just ended a prime minister's career. That's the future Lord Hayward is predicting for Keir Starmer, and it's not pretty. We're talking very, very large losses, a drubbing in Labour heartlands, defeat in Wales, and an absolute battering in Scotland. This isn't just a bad night at the ballot box, this is potentially career-ending stuff. May 7th, 2026 might not be circled on your calendar yet, but according to one leading pollster, it could be the day that decides whether Keir Starmer stays in number 10 or starts updating his CV. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into why these local elections might just be the political earthquake that reshapes everything. Let's start with the bombshell prediction itself, because Lord Hayward is not mincing words here. He's a conservative peer and a leading pollster, so he knows his numbers, and what he's seeing is catastrophic for Labour. He's predicting that Keir Starmer faces very, very large losses in next year's local elections, and these results could be decisive for his future as Prime Minister. Now, when a pollster uses the word decisive, that's not casual language. That means these elections could literally determine whether Starmer survives politically. We're not talking about a minor setback that he can brush off with some positive spin and a reshuffled cabinet. We're talking about the kind of losses that have MPs whispering in corridors, journalists writing obituaries for political careers, and potential leadership challengers polishing their campaign speeches. Lord Hayward's painting a picture of absolute carnage across multiple fronts, a drubbing in Labour's heartlands in England. Think about that for a second. Labour heartlands, the places where Labour should be able to win with their eyes closed, where red rosettes have been passed down through generations like family heirlooms. Those places are expected to deliver Labour a drubbing. That's not just losing, that's being comprehensively beaten in areas where you're supposed to be strongest. It's like a football team losing at their home stadium to a team from 3 divisions below. It shouldn't happen, but apparently it's about to. Then there's Wales, where Labour is predicted to face defeat in the Welsh Senate. Labour has dominated Welsh politics for decades. Wales has been so reliably red that it's practically been taken for granted. But according to these predictions, that dominance is about to come crashing down. Plaid Cymru and Reform are expected to perform strongly, which means Labour's losing voters in multiple directions. Some are going to the Welsh nationalists, others are going to the populist right. That's not a swing, that's a complete fracturing of Labour's coalition. And then we get to Scotland, where Lord Hayward suggests Labour is on course for one hell of a battering in the Scottish Parliament. One hell of a battering. That's vivid language, and it suggests something beyond just losing seats. That suggests humiliation. The SNP, Reform, and the Greens could all do well at Labour's expense, which means Scottish voters are looking at Labour and deciding that literally any other option looks more appealing. For a party that used to utterly dominate Scottish politics before the SNP's rise, this is another kick while they're already down. But here's where it gets really interesting in terms of who's taking these votes from Labour, because we're not just talking about one opponent. We're talking about what Lord Hayward calls a cacophony of winners. Labour is on course for very, very large losses to Reform UK, the Greens, the Liberal Democrats, and in East London, pro-Gaza independents. That's 4 completely different political directions, all simultaneously peeling away Labour support. Reform is taking working-class voters who feel Labour's abandoned them. The Greens are taking progressive voters who think Labour's not going far enough on climate and social issues. The Lib Dems are taking middle-class moderates who think Labour's too chaotic and incompetent. And in East London, pro-Gaza independents are taking voters furious about foreign policy. When you're hemorrhaging support in 4 different directions to 4 completely different types of opponents, that's not a problem you can fix with one policy change or one good speech. That's a fundamental crisis of identity and appeal. It means you've managed to alienate basically everyone in different ways, which is actually quite an achievement, albeit not one you'd want to put on your political resume. Now, these council elections are happening on May 7th across all 32 London boroughs, as well as in Birmingham, Greater Manchester, Tyneside, and across the home countries. These aren't minor local councils nobody's heard of. These are major population centers. London, Birmingham, Manchester, these are the places where millions of people live and where election results make national headlines. If Labour gets destroyed in London, that's Sadiq Khan's city. If they lose badly in Greater Manchester, that's Andy Burnham's territory, and he's already being talked about as a potential Starmer replacement. The symbolism of Labour losing in their own power bases run by their own prominent figures would be absolutely devastating. And let's talk about what Lord Hayward said about the stakes, because he's not just predicting bad results, he's predicting that these results could determine the fate of not just Keir Starmer, but also Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor. If both the Prime Minister and the Chancellor are on the chopping block based on these results, we're talking about a potential complete collapse of Labour's leadership. That's not reshuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic, that's the entire ship going down. A few months ago, apparently, it looked like May 7th would be decisive for the leaderships of both Labour and the Conservatives. But as we move into 2026, it's looking like the May elections could decide Starmer and Reeves's fate, while it's less clear that it will affect Kemi. That's fascinating because it suggests the Conservatives might actually be in a stronger position than Labour right now, at least in terms of leadership stability. Kemi might lose seats, she might have a rough night, but she's probably not going to face a leadership challenge based on these results. Starmer and Reeves, they might be writing their resignation speeches. The fact that Labour, who won a landslide less than 2 years ago, are now in a weaker position than the Conservatives, who got obliterated in that same election, tells you everything about how quickly things have deteriorated. Lord Hayward claims the Conservatives are likely to lose seats overall, so this isn't a Conservative triumph exactly, but they could pick up seats in London, which would be symbolically huge. Imagine the headlines that the Tories start winning back London seats while Labour's in government. That's the kind of thing that gets carved onto political tombstones. But the real winner, according to these predictions, is Reform UK. Starting from a low base, Reform is likely to make the most gains. They're the ones with momentum. They're the ones picking up disaffected voters from both Labour and the Conservatives, and they're the ones who could emerge from May 7th looking like the big winners of British politics. So what does this actually mean practically? Well, if these predictions come true, Keir Starmer is going to wake up on May 8th facing an absolute political crisis. His MPs will be panicking because they'll be looking at these local results and extrapolating what it means for their own seats at the next general election. And what it means is they're probably going to lose. When MPs think they're going to lose their seats, they get desperate. And desperate MPs do desperate things, like plot leadership coups. We've already heard rumblings about potential Starmer replacements: Andy Burnham, Angela Rare, Wes Streeting. After a disastrous May 7th, those rumblings could turn into a roar. Rachel Reeves would be in equally precarious position. If the economic message isn't working, if voters are blaming Labour's economic policies for their struggles, and if that's translating into electoral disaster, then Starmer might decide he needs a new chancellor to reset the narrative. Or the party might decide they need a new prime minister and chancellor to completely start over. Either way, May 7th could trigger a leadership crisis that makes the Conservative Party's recent history of eating prime ministers look stable by comparison. But let's zoom out for a second and ask why this is happening. How did Labour go from landslide victory to potential electoral catastrophe in less than 2 years? Well, we've covered many of the reasons in previous videos. Unpopular policies that get U-turned, making everyone look stupid. Tax increases despite promises not to raise taxes. Economic policies that don't seem to be delivering growth. A perception that Labour doesn't have a clear plan or compelling vision. Factional infighting. A prime minister who doesn't seem to connect with voters. All of these things have contributed to Labour's declining popularity. But there's something deeper happening here, which is that Labour's coalition was always fragile. They won their landslide not because everyone loved Labour, but because everyone was sick of the Conservatives. That's a crucial difference. They won by default, not by enthusiasm. And now that they're in government and actually having to make decisions, that coalition is fracturing because different parts of it want completely different things. Working-class voters in Northern England want different things than progressive activists in London want different things than middle-class liberals in the home countries. You can hold that coalition together in opposition when you're just criticizing the government, but in power, when you actually have to make choices, it falls apart. Reform UK is capitalizing on this by appealing to working-class voters who feel culturally and economically abandoned by Labour. The Greens are capitalizing on progressive voters who think Labour's too timid and compromised. The Lib Dems are taking middle-class moderates who think Labour's too chaotic and incompetent. And in East London, pro-Gaza independents are taking voters furious about foreign policy. Each of these groups has found somewhere else to go, and that's devastating for Labour. The other factor is that local elections tend to be protest votes. People who might hold their nose and vote Labour in a general election because they definitely don't want the Tories back in power might feel free to vote for someone else in local elections where the stakes feel lower. That makes May 7th particularly dangerous for Starmer because they could reveal just how shallow Labour's support actually is. So what happens if Lord Hayward's predictions come true? Well, we're talking about potentially the shortest peacetime premiership in modern British history. Starmer would be under immediate pressure to resign or face a leadership challenge. The party would descend into another period of infighting and instability. Whoever replaces Starmer would have minimal time to turn things around before the next general election. And all of this chaos would be happening while the country faces serious economic and social challenges that actually need addressing. It would be a disaster for Labour, but it would also be a disaster for effective governance. And here's the really wild part. If